Hi, I'm Hannah, and you are listening to the L&D Leaders podcast. We talk about what it really takes to make learning collaborative, connected to everyday work, and part of how organizations actually grow. Welcome to listen to the L&D Leaders podcast. Today, we are exploring what it really takes to develop leadership and learning in a way that strengthens relationships, builds inclusive cultures, and supports organizational transformation. My guest today is Dr. Eerika Hedman-Phillips, who is an experienced organizational development and leadership professional with over 15 years of experience in leadership, communications, coaching, change, learning, and research. Welcome to join me today, Erika.
Thank you.
Erika, you are currently working as a talent management lead for an international sports media and broadcasting company. You have said that in your work you are combining a pragmatic approach with the deep academic expertise and also apply systemic thinking to how leaders grow, how teams collaborate, and also how organizations are transforming and evolving. Your doctoral research explored executive level leadership development, and your academic work has been published in peer reviews, journals, and books. I have to say, I couldn't be more happy to have you joining me and to hear your insightful stories.
There's a lot to unpack in that introduction, so thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this podcast, so very happy to join you today. I'm one of those anomalies, I think, in my group that I just didn't fall into organizational development. I was quite deliberately going into it, and it was pretty much throughout the studies at the university when I sort of decided I want to get into consultancy and I want to be there to help organizations to create thriving environments, positive environments for people so that we all can come in as the best versions of ourselves and do some amazing stuff. I entered into the organizational development world with a thought like if we would really lift some of the principles of how we connect or how we communicate, how we build meaningful relationships, that, the world would be such a better place in a small scale in an organization, but also looking at what's going on in the world at the moment.
Mm.
So I guess that was the kind of the entry into organizational development for me. I think I went in a bit naive to start with, but very quickly sort of gained the practical elements of how change works, how to engage managers into the process, and sort of the early pieces of work, which I was very privileged to be part of. And with that came further learning and sort of the more theoretical side of organizational development as well. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of the starter of it. And then it's just kind of evolved as we go, both from a practical perspective, gaining experience both as a sort of consultant, academic, as well as in-house expert.
Oh, I love it how you are talking about being a bit naive, but having the big vision and really having the thrive to change organizations, change the ways people are working and connecting for the shared growth. So I really love your story.
Oh, thank you. I think a little bit of naivety is good. Sometimes like not knowing and just stepping into the situation that you don't have expertise with is sometimes useful, because sometimes the more we learn, the more expertise we gain can become a blocker in itself. So I think for learning, being in that kind of bit of curious, naive place is been useful for me.
Oh yes, 100% can imagine. So you are now talking about starting as a consultant. How has your journey actually developed after that?
It was a bit of like a crossroad moment for me when I had finished my PhD, and I could almost see like there's three different routes that I could step into. I could continue and look for more academic routes. I could continue more in the consultancy space, or I could explore the route. What does the internal world look like? And I think at that point I was more curious about the internal world, which as a consultant, you're kind of a visitor and you see and capture snippets of what's going on, but you're not there for the long run and seeing the daily in and out and what it really takes to embed change or implement a framework. And I always believe that as a consultant, you can be a useful sort of helper and partner in that, but the responsibility and ownership sits and the capability sits within the organization. I was curious about that side. I want to see the nitty-gritty, the good and the bad of how that happens.
I had actually prepared for us a few rapid round questions, and I had the thought of we need to warm us up to get started. And now I'm like, okay, we are already there, and I am eager to continue that conversation. But probably we just get started with the rapid round questions. So, are you ready?
I hope I am. I think I am.
Great. So, first of all, which teacher, coach, or mentor had the biggest impact on you on your journey, and why is that?
There are many and various, but I'm going to pick one name, and that name is Martin Little, who was very early on part of my consultancy journey, but also very heavily part of my PhD journey as someone who guided, mentored, provoked different thinking. So I think for me, he's made a great impact on the way I think and perceive things.
Sounds great. And the other one, what's a small daily habit that helps you learn or stay curious every day?
You can make a great learning impact in mini moments. If I have 10 minutes and can read a page, that's great. That's enough. Or if I can find 5 minutes to reflect or write some notes, that's great. So don't make it a big fuss about, oh, I couldn't find the 1 hour or so forth to do some learning. I think like embrace the mini moments is one. And I think for curiosity, the thought that holding something in your mind almost as a question mark, holding your own thoughts lightly, your beliefs lightly, that actually I could be wrong, or what if there could be another option, there could be an alternative, and most likely there is. So don't get too fond of your own thinking and beliefs, I would say, are some of the things. And I think that's something that Martin Little also said, like, there's always a danger when you get too stuck.
Really, really important things for everyone of us, I would say. Thank you. You have already kind of taken us through your journey, but shall we start going through a bit about your work today? How does it look, and what are the core elements in your work today?
If I pick up, for example, organizational development, which I think is a bit more to do overall transformation and making sure the organization is effective. We're looking at like, how do we create that sort of high performance, healthy, positive environment so that the organization can be quicker, learn faster, innovate more, and things like that. And then L&D is a bit of like the lever and the glue that can enable some of those capabilities that are needed to go there. So that's how I sort of see that. And then you have the other practices like talent management in more generic, making sure that there is a healthy pipeline and pools of talent available when you need them. You need to think about risk management a little bit as well. So if there is a major risk of a critical role becoming vacant, or people who've made a decision to leave a business and so forth, what do we do in those situations? Are we prepared? Another lens is probably looking at the overall employee experience, and that's usually kind of then the lens of like, what are they talking about? What are they telling about the place they're working on? And then you have different mechanisms to try to capture some of that in terms of feedback and surveys and so forth. So those are probably the different elements that I've been touching in one way or another throughout kind of my more internal talent and organizational development roles.
To me, at least, that sounds that you have kind of gotten what you were longing for, to really see all of the different perspective on international, big enterprise, internal organizational development, and L&D.
Yeah.
How has that working as an internal professional for those big international global enterprises, how has that actually shaped your way of thinking and seeing learning and leadership? overall.
It is a humbling experience making the move. And, so as a consultant, sometimes things seem quite simple and straightforward, and they're not, because you then have the layers of the culture and the patterns and the internal dynamics and things like that. So, change takes time. It takes a lot of effort. So I think naive me externally probably wouldn't have understood that fully. There's much more going on in the interpersonal soup inside an organization that you might realize, and you just need to learn to navigate through that. And
Mm.
I would probably have the tendency of like, let's change all of these 100 things at once and let's go for it. And then you kind of realize people can't take that much at once. And we have to almost take baby steps and see, like, okay, if this is the direction we want to go. And again, that is relative to the organization. So what might be right in one place might not work in another place. I've sort of taken that there's no one right way or one right framework as such. You then have to navigate and find what works for the business and for the future of the organization, I suppose. There's quite a lot in there, but
Yeah, there are many learnings, I would say. I already introduced to you there in the beginning to be both pragmatic and academic professional. So how do you see those two identities, even if I may, come together in your work?
for me, there's always been a passion of merging the two worlds. So, one of the questions, especially when I was doing my PhD, was around if we take the principles, the framework, the theory, what's the intervention without explaining the theory, if that makes sense? So, rather than having to teach that, oh, I'm going to do this because this is what the theory says, instead of doing that, what's the one or two questions I could ask that both respects the theoretical thinking but becomes very practical? I mean, I love spending time in the theoretical space, but then knowing that people don't necessarily in busy life have the capacity to take it all in, and they don't necessarily care as much as I do. So is finding the way, like, actually, what is then really relevant? I think just doing practice without having the thinking, it's just kind of you keep repeating. So if you give a practice or a tool that's a hammer, every problem you treat as a nail is that kind of thinking, and you don't really then flex with that. So uh, I think the best outcomes when you kind of focus on the both. Equally, if you just focus on the thinking and talking and giving information without it leading to any practical things or implementations, it just stays as a sort of wishful thinking.
That's really, really practical example. I think that it's really a nice way of combining the both sides, because I think you said that probably all of the people they don't care, but it can also be that you are kind of letting them free of not having the capacity to try to take all of the theoretical thinking or the approaches in, but you are then actually able to challenge people in new ways or help them or ask different kind of questions, if I hear correct, when you are actually still having the mindset there
Yeah.
behind.
And I think for a practitioner, I think there is a responsibility as a practitioner to be continuously educating yourself, to broaden your thinking. So I think that is a key for any sort of learning and development professional as well, to sort of delve deeper into the science. Like we've done the 70-20-10 model. Where it actually came from? Is there some scientific reason or backing for it? And I think sometimes as a practitioner that you need to work on yourself quite a lot to challenge your own thinking and ideas and be in that space. Like let me kind of explore and see if there's a different perspective or a different way of doing things.
Yeah. When looking at leadership development more closely, what are the capabilities you think organizations should now develop, especially if looking at how the organization is capable in answering the future needs of the modern work?
I know there's a lot of talks about AI and the modern technologies and things like that. I think we always talk about things that's changed, but remember things that are most likely staying quite stable is that organizations are still full of people. trying to figure it out together. But I think there's something around understanding the humanness, how we create things together, and leadership as a key enabler of that is still the key focus, I would say. And even more so now that people can also use AI to support with the more of the technical side of their roles. But the empathy, when you walk through the doors and you see someone upset and you go and connect with them or show support, there's something about that human element that we can't take away from. I mean, we can find replacements. There's lots of AI coaching tools and things like that. But I'm also thinking about neuroscience and what happens in our brains and bodies when we just connect with humans. I think we're meant to do that. We're born to be like that. So that's something that is not going to go away.
Yeah.
And therefore, from a leadership perspective, there is a strong emphasis on how to empower people in a way that they can use this emotional intelligence, they use their creativity, curiosity, and how to sort of elevate or amplify those aspects. I think is becoming more and more important.
I hope so too, and I really trust that it is so. But how is it possible for an L&D professional to really develop those capabilities in practice? What can we do? How to stay human? How to help people to connect?
Well, I think it comes in various, whether it's more of a leadership development program where you bring people together to discuss what their reality is, to share examples, stories, but also to learn something like actually, what can I take in this day and age when there's a lot of out there? How can I sort of enhance my leadership practice? And what does that look like? I think another trend I'm actually seeing, and I was reflecting on it the other day, is that I've seen a huge pullback to being in person and going off sites and doing things somewhere out of the working environment. My opinion is that program kind of combines all the different types of elements of learning tend to bring better outcomes because you create various different types of touch points for people to both explore what it means for them, but also experiment and put things into practice.
Yeah, and I think there is like a lot on why are we getting together? Why do we actually spend time together? Because there is also quite a lot of discussion around should we just force people to come to work at the offices? Is it still okay to work remote? What are the things that we can do digitally? And what are the things we can do in a synchronous online meeting? Or what are the things that we can do asynchronously so everyone is just working when the time fits for them the best? How are we then also using the time when we are getting into an offsite? Is it just like hearing the speeches or looking at the dozens of slides, or is it then more collaborative and we are really getting inspired together, being curious, being humane together and to each other? So I think that there is also a lot of like still practice to be done. How are we using the time and how are we the most effective?
Yeah, I agree.
So that quite nicely connects to social learning, which is one of the hot potatoes for organizational developmental learning today. What does social learning actually mean in your context in leadership development or talent management overall?
What it means to me is it's the sort of the sense making together because I could consume content. I could do a online course. If I don't get to share that and sort of like, actually, when they said that, or I took it in this way, and this is what it meant for me, and this is what I think I need to do in practice, I think my learning will be amplified if I get to do it together with a group and we share kind of what our takes are on it or from it. And that's what I think social learning. I don't know what your thoughts are.
That sounds like a perfect description on social learning. How do you see that being part of your work today, or what are the actual best practices for that?
So when I said like I've seen the trend to move back into this coming together in person, I think that there is a strong encouragement to do that. Pretty much similar to sort of, 20 something years ago when that was almost like that's how you do learning. You take people somewhere and you spend a day learning something together and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, I think that there is still the point of how do we then take those learnings and those things that start going around in our heads into our everyday work. So that is still the part I see missing quite often. How are we taking those new practices into our work? Because that really needs self-leadership.
I hear you in that because that's usually the one thing that stops behavior change. So you've had a great day learning stuff, and then people reflect and it's a great day, but then nothing changes afterwards. So there is that individual responsibility as well, but maybe also as a program designer, what are the touch points that you follow up? Like, oh yeah, this training course, you said you will do X, Y, and Z. Have you done it? So I think there's a bit of like, how can you do these gentle nudges or create a sense of group ownership between whoever the participants are and create those kind of containers for people to then do something with it or experiment and so forth. From a practitioner perspective or L&D leader perspective, find your own sounding boards as well. Make sure you have a bit of a, your own academy of people behind you that you can go to and say like, this is a challenge. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this, or I tried this, it didn't work. So I think there's that kind of support mechanism or a kind of academy of different voices. Some might be more critical, some might be the supportive. So you kind of build your own group to be at your service and support you.
Oh, I love it. This is so encouraging that you can really find those ways to develop yourself as a leader, also as a colleague. So to really get into the sense making and reflection together with your peers or your manager or some coach, mentor, whoever that is. But I think that it's just so much in the core of how you are actually getting into those conversations. How are you learning together? How are you finding those networks where to collaborate and be together with those people? Really, really inspiring. You have spoken before about reflexivity, and I think that this now is kind of in the core how you are also talking about the leadership skills development. I would describe reflexivity as being responsible for my own way of working and knowing who I am, what is my social reality, and what are the interpretations that I am actually creating with these people. And that is, of course, a powerful invitation, especially for leaders to also show vulnerability in that way. But how do you actually bring reflexivity into leadership development and your work?
I think there's a lot in terms of self-awareness, knowing yourself and your trigger points, how you typically respond to different situations, whether you like it or not, is one aspect. I think there is another one. I think it comes from more from a therapeutic practice, but it really hit the nail on the head when someone said, that you can never make someone feel something. I have this constantly with my children who's like, Mummy, you made me so angry. I was like, I did not make you angry. I did something. You responded to it. And that's the emotion that came. So I think there's that kind of understanding of responsibility of your own reaction. Yes, we need to be mindful of other people. We need to be mindful of our impact on others, but also treat others like they are able to handle themselves. They are grown ups. They own their responses. So I think for leaders is to be mindful of how they communicate, their words, their actions, and what they generate and what therefore the response might be. Because like the good old communication theory said, like, meaning of a gesture is in the response. So yes, you can say like intention was this, but again the impact was different, and it's the impact that we need to own and be mindful of.
Yeah, but isn't that quite the big ask and quite the big task for all of the leaders?
It is. And I mean, I've been exploring for the past 15, 20 years, and it's never easy. And especially when we are in a stressful situation, it's hard to then expect a different behavior because I'm probably not in a space where I've fully emotionally regulated because my defenses have gone up. I probably am not conscious of it in the moment because there's a flush of emotions. But at the end, it's like then owning the action, the impact of that. Because, well, hopefully, leader will then be tuned into seeing the outcome and being okay talking about it and say, like, actually, what I did or didn't do was creating that situation. So there is a huge responsibility in that sense for leaders. It's a long journey. We're never finished articles. We are human beings. We are going to make mistakes and we have to deal with it in the right way and learn to deal with it in the way that then creates something different.
Yeah, and be brave in learning from those moments. And as you were saying, that everyone is making those mistakes and everyone is creating patterns for their teams. So how do we learn from those, and how are we then also actually reflecting patterns that are happening there in the team?
Yeah. And sometimes we still very much rely on the guesswork of what other people might be thinking or what they might be feeling, rather than kind of adding the meta level of, just being transparent and open and vulnerable with like, well, this is what's going on for me. It takes a lot of effort in that sense to be in that kind of moment when you are in the moment, but kind of having that observer of self position as well. It is tough. Personally, I find it's hard. There's also danger of if you're over analyzing every single detail that you stop being genuine. And again, going back to what I took from Martin Little some time ago when he was coaching me through my PhD, and I was sort of giving a bit of a self beating on a moment when I said, "Oh, I should have done that, and I should have maybe asked that question, and oh, why didn't I do?" All of those things. He's just like, you did what you did in the moment. In the moment, you can only do what you do. Move on. And then you can reflect on it, but then move quite quickly on to, okay, what can I do differently? Or what did I learn from that? And staying curious.
Oh yes, some things to practice after listening to this session, like quite the big themes that you're touching upon. Thank you. And you have studied development and facilitation of senior leadership teams, and you carried with you there in your study a framework that is called Coordinated Management of Meaning (CMM), and it offers a powerful way to understand the interaction and meaning making between people. But what is your definition on CMM, the simple practical way of describing the theory?
I would say it's a comprehensive explanation and framework for understanding why we communicate and interact the way we do and the layers behind it. What's happening is our lived experience, and then we have our told experience, what we tell about what happened to us, and how that story then is told influences our perception of it. And therefore, it's worth paying attention to how we narrate our experience into being. And we always have the power of change that narration. So our past is past. The events take place. You can't change them. But the way you talk about the event, that's the bit everyone can change. When people come into a situation or they say different things, there's a reason for it. Sometimes you hear people saying like, I couldn't help myself, but, or, well, that happened, therefore I had to do this. What created that had or ought or must or should? I think sometimes our language is the gateway to that. So paying attention how people word things or how they talk about things, there's always so much more beneath the surface. Quite often we jump to quick conclusions of they did that, therefore we almost put a label on the person. That's a quick shortcut we try to do because, again, it's a human thing to do. But there's always a reason. There's more to unpick under that. And so I think it's a good reminder in that self. And then the other angle is really about what's the story that we have about ourselves, but also about other people, about situations, about organizations. And then the follow up question is like, how is that story serving you? And I think those are sometimes quite powerful. Again, people owning the way they speak and the way they describe situation is also part of them creating it and influencing. So there's a responsibility of that as well. Again, going back to the reflexivity.
I think that that was really a comprehensive answer on what is CMM actually, because it may be that it's unfamiliar for many of our listeners. And I can easily hear that that is actually also offering you a tool set and a skill set within your work to really help people to focus on new things, to reflect, to make sense of their own way of working, probably also for some teams, like how are we making sense together, but really change their way of thinking, seeing the world in a bit of a different way. And through that, I believe that that is kind of where the learning then actually happens.
Yes, and I think you can kind of to build on that. We go to one meeting to another, and then we kind of end up speaking past each other, or we think we're talking about the same thing and come out of the meeting and we're completely different understandings of the whole situation. Just like actually looking at what's the purpose of this meeting, what we're trying to achieve. I mean, we always still will come up with different understanding because that's just how we are subjective in our own world and seeing and taking information in a different way, but just spending a bit of time like this is what we came to here to do together and this is the outcome we're going and checking understanding. I think quite often we come in and we have different actions on our plates and then we come together like, oh, how did that happen? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's true. That's something probably everyone also recognizes. Some of those things just happen there. And it's not always easy to reflect on. Okay, what was the impact? Why did this actually happen? What were kind of the steps we came into this conclusion or so? So I think that if we're talking about the social learning and reflexivity and sense making, we are often probably creating some value that is not so easy to measure. So it's shown in the team dynamics, it's shown in decision making, in some further engagement or how effective we are, how well we are actually collaborating together. But how are you actually looking at the effect of social learning? I would love to hear how do you actually approach measuring the impact of your learning initiatives?
It's always tricky, especially when you are very much focused on human behavior, which is non-linear, and we try to measure it in a linear way, like X leads to Y and so forth. But it feels sometimes a bit fabricated, if I'm honest. Nevertheless, I think it's good to know kind of what is it that we're doing? Where do we want to see the change? So being able to define those in the very beginning and being clear of this program or this intervention, the reason why we're doing it is because we want to see this change or this improvement. And then you have to come up with a mechanism. How can you actually see it? Is it self-reports? Is it qualitative data? Is it something that is more hard data? And then defining what are the touch points where you're going to see it? Why I said like sometimes it's more fabricated than the reality because, you know, something minor you're introducing, it can be like 15 years and something happens, but we will never be able to connect it back. I think when I was doing my master thesis and, you know, trying to connect the numbers and like, oh, we did this and then this went up and so forth, my supervisors were always very clear. You can't make the argument. You can't make that sort of cause effect relationship, especially when you are in a sort of space of human behavior.
So is that then something that in L&D we also need to be okay with? And we're talking so much about the value creation and how to measure the success. I think that we can definitely measure some things. As I also hear from you as well, but there are still some parts of the actual impact we can't really measure as it's not linear, as you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, like you can measure the return on investment. So if this training course was going to provide sales skills and now we're selling more, you could sort of make like, actually, was it the training or was it something else? Like, well, it can be. I think the scientist in me, the researcher in me said like always be careful with hardcore predictions because we know the nature is more complex and as mentioned is not as straightforward. I think it's important to own the measurements and own the numbers, like do the basic reporting because it does tell you something. How many employees were trained? What was the budget? What was the impact in that sense? And, you know, if we invested X amount on careers and personal development, does it show in our engagement scores? Is probably quite a simple way of like, actually, is it demonstrating itself? And then you can go and explore it further. How many hours we've created, how many internal courses we've created, how many people attended, therefore, are they engaged? Is our online system activation rate high or low, or has it improved and so on? So I think those are kind of the key numbers. Whether they tell anything about how we've improved the business, how we've made the business more effective or perform in a better way, that is a harder connection to make. You can make assumption about by doing these things, we are helping people to grow. Therefore, the likelihood is that the business will grow and it helps the business to be better. I think we can make those sort of assumptions. Whether I will be then able to prove it as as a clear statement or argument, like because we did this, therefore business has grown. I'm a bit more careful and cautious with those sort of statements.
Yeah, thank you. There were really, really good insights on how to still find those signals and kind of the supportive measurements on are we moving to the right direction? Good examples. One big challenge for L&D is actually to get into those more strategic conversations and tables. So I was also wondering, is there any tips or any practices you would imagine would be important for all L&D leaders to be there in those conversations around the business growth?
It is a really important question. I think there's a couple of things for an L&D professional. One of the key capabilities really understanding the organization and the business because it's harder to join the conversations if you have no idea of, you know, the business priorities or where the industry is going in the future. So I think there's a bit of business thinking that needs to be in place or just the basic understanding of how the organization operates. So just having that and being always curious about those things is critical, as well as the networking within the organization, building those relationships with people so that you can be part of the conversation. It's like, oh, tell me a bit more about where is your area going? What's the pain points for your team? Where do you think you're going in the future? You know, what do you think about that? And so forth. And I think that some of their work and their alignment will then come as a result of those conversations because as a L&D, you will start to think differently about it as well. Like, oh, actually, they've mentioned this is where they're heading. These are some of the key things where the business is developing. How can we support that? How can we start to build those capabilities earlier on and not find ourselves and like, well, this now shifted, we need to respond, but we don't have the capacity or the capability in our organization to do so. I think that would be important.
Definitely. Thank you. You have been for a long time on this field of learning and development, and you have been working in multiple organizations. So how do you see the future of L&D?
And I think there is a growing respect. Often L&D is sort of an extension of the operational HR. And I think there is that sort of shift that actually it can own its own space. It's a very special kind of deep expertise that is required in that space, both from a sort of technical and also behavioral side. For the future, I would like to see L&D really move and make that sort of thing a shift of being a true partner for the business and really helping to tackle some of the challenges that the organization is facing and being in line with that. And AI will be interesting to see because, you know, AI can pull a lot of content together and design programs. for people. So I think that's an interesting one to see where that will shift, because arguably you could replace a lot of the L&D work with AI at the moment. So we will see where we're heading.
Definitely, we will see. From your perspective, what would be the mindset or capability that you would encourage every L&D leader to learn?
I think as a standard, having that responsibility of updating your own thinking every now and then, being a bit of a explorer mindset, I think that's critical to model learning for others. I think that's part of the integrity as well. Like, if you are the specialist learning and development professional in the organization, how do you role model that for others? That mindset.
Yeah, that sounds good. Staying curious and open for learning probably is also part of that. Erika, thank you so much for the truly insightful, thorough, full conversation. This was really inspiring for me.
Likewise, thank you so much. And lots of thoughts for myself as well.
I especially loved how you highlighted the role of interaction, reflexivity, and social learning in shaping how organizations can be competitive and how leaders can create the realities they are working within. So I hope we get to continue this in another time as well.
Thank you. My pleasure.
If this episode resonated with you, come and be part of the conversation also going forward. Please join us here in the L&D Leaders podcast and in our L&D Leaders community. You will also find the link to join the community in the episode description. We'd love to see you there. Thank you so much.